welcome to the 101st episode of the Sales Code Leadership Podcast. This is going to be a little bit of a retrospective, looking back at the previous 100 episodes that we've now recorded, and an opportunity for me perhaps to reflect on how far we've come. Because when I started this podcast a couple of years ago, I was really beginning the process of engineering solutions for chief revenue officers that would help them to build high performance sales teams. And I realized at that point, actually, I didn't know many of these people, and I didn't really understand what they were specifically interested in. So I came up with this cunning wheeze to interview them, put them on tape, and enable them to share their thoughts on what it is that makes great sales teams, great salespeople. What are the challenges of leading these kind of teams in this challenging economic environment that we're in? So that's what I did. And it's a great opportunity for those people to learn from their peers and share their wisdom with all the young upcoming salespeople that are interested in learning and developing in the tech sector. One of the questions that fascinated me when I started recording the podcast, and the one that produced some of the most interesting and thoughtful answers, in fact, to the point where people would actually stop and reflect on it and sometimes struggle to come up with a response. When you've got that, you know you've got a great question. And that question was, what's the one thing you wish you knew at the beginning of your career that you picked up along the way? And got some fantastic responses, many of which you're going to hear in the forthcoming clips from some of the great people we've had on this podcast over the past couple of years. And what you'll find listening to them is some deep reflections on what they've learned in their journey, things they share with those people perhaps at the earlier stages of their careers who've got an opportunity to learn, not from necessarily the mistakes of others, but from things that we picked up along the way.
First piece of advice would be just carry on being yourself and carry on doing the empathic things that you do.
Yep.
Oscar Wilde, you and I were chatting about this some time ago. Oscar Wilde said there's no point in being someone else because that was already taken. So just be yourself, okay? Really, really important advice, I think. But be yourself. I don't think that's enough. I think be yourself, but also become a sponge and absorb as much as you can in this fast-moving and competitive world that we're in, so that you do shape and mold yourself during the course of a quarter or a course of a year, so you can look back on yourself and say, I am actually better now than I was 6, 9, 12 months ago because I do, X, Y, and Z. And so how do you do that? You read books. I don't care whether you read paperback books, hardback books, read it on a Kindle, listen to TED Talks, have a chat with an experienced, intelligent guy like you just to get perspectives, go and have a coffee, talk to your salespeople, talk to your peers, but make a point of exposing your mind to the latest thinking and the latest ideas, so that you build on the good person that you already are, but you add those new S for skills and T for talents as quickly as you can.
I think that performance measured individuals, salespeople typically, are sometimes hesitant to ask for help and in that sense be vulnerable. And I found that for myself too, right? And it's like, I should know this, so I should probably just figure it out on my own and see how far I can get. Sometimes with success, sometimes not so much. But actually, when we do ask for help, it's sort of infusing and inspiring collaboration, right? So I think it for people, it even releases like oxytocin and the natural sort of and biological say attitude to collaborate. And so my mindset on asking for help and being vulnerable, and how powerful asking for help is, if I knew that earlier on, I would have done it much more often. So I think that is a potential superpower that we all have, that we're hesitant to use. And I think this is my personal belief, that we typically only get to it later in our career, when we don't, I guess, worry so much anymore about what everyone thinks about us, etc., and that we always feel like we're in the spotlight when we're really not, right? Because that's how everyone feels. But if I could advise my younger self, would say, if you don't know something, just ask for help, whatever it is. if you've had that question, there's probably like 10 people around you walking around with the same question. So you might as well do yourself and all those other individuals a favor. Raise your hand, ask the question, and get on with it.
Yeah, if I focus on sales leadership, I think for me personally, I did the kind of cardinal sin of leadership when I first got my first leadership role. And that's where, and it was a tough one actually as well, because my first time I got a leadership role, it was managing the team that I was an individual contributor in, which I think is super tough anyway, because one minute you're kind of peers, then all of a sudden you're kind of someone's line manager. Can be tough. I think my learn there was I went in with the tell versus the ask. So telling my team what I needed versus asking them and bringing them with me would be the one thing I go back now and give that advice to someone who's starting out on doing that is, yeah, take the right philosophy. That's the one bit of advice I would have given myself then is ask, don't tell.
I'd say that not everything is personal, so don't take things so personally. I think especially when you're earlier in your career, you take every setback, every lesson learned to be deeply personal. If people give you feedback, you internalize it, you make it really personal. But in reality, I would say, giving that perspective to my younger self, I would say, don't take things too personally. Kind of step back, take time to think before you internalize or kind of take that to be something against you. Oftentimes, we don't know what is happening in other people's lives, especially in sales. You'll get some pretty rough reactions sometimes to those initial cold calls in your early career, or maybe as a sales manager, you might hit a setback and take it really personally. But taking that time to step back, consider the broader context, I think will help you to have more resilience in your career and move forward with greater pace.
I mean, I have so many to choose from because there's so much I've learned, but I would say the number one that I've learned, and this probably ties a little bit to Challenger, is don't make the mistake of coming across as naive in your outreach to executives by oversimplifying complex problems. So what I mean by that is I see a lot of messages that, and I was guilty of this too, that say, you've got a growth problem and this is the solution, right? I think one of the things, especially when selling into the large enterprise space, is no problem is that simple and uncomplicated. And I think when we lead with curiosity, how are you thinking about solving this problem? I've got something interesting that I think might help you think through it, as opposed to, I have the silver bullet solution. I look back and cringe on some of the emails I sent when I was first selling, because I thought, okay, the goal is show them how you help them. Let me tell you why my product is amazing. And I think if I were now knowing what I do about senior executives, if I saw those emails, I would think, this is the last person I'm going to take advice from, because they think this problem is easy and it's not.
This may be one very, very particular to me, but I used to, I was a salesperson, and I was very, very focused on pipeline generation. That was always a real strength of mine. Mm-hmm. And this is an example. I would, go in sales leadership, and I would kind of expect everyone else to have a strength in pipeline generation. This is just an example. And I think one of the things that it took me probably a little bit longer than it should have to understand is that not everyone's the same as me. Not as in, having strengths there, but as in not everyone will care about the same things you do. Not everyone will want to, not everyone will sort of see the value in going that extra mile on that thing, whether it be a proposal. And likewise, there'll be things that I don't think are worth going the extra mile on, but someone that really does think, and trying to understand that it's actually more like a balance of things. I love this idea of everyone having an equal pot of talent, and we just distribute it a bit differently. And I wish earlier in my career I could have thought about that more clearly, because I think some people are just never going to be creative as they are logical. And therefore, in a sales context, there may be someone that's brilliant at
building very scientific, logical business cases, but they look terrible. And you're better trying to work with that person to enhance that talent they've got.
I'd like to thank all of the great sales leaders I've had on the podcast over the past couple of years. Won't mention any specific names because you can see how many out of the 100 I've got wonderful backgrounds to share with you. Lots of reflections on the clips that we've posted here. Not only can you collect this podcast as audio, you can also watch it on YouTube. Those of you that have been keen listeners to the Sales Code Leadership podcast for the past couple of years maybe will have noticed quite recently our new partnership with Medic Media, which has taken us to new levels of production quality. During this time, we've been able to get some really interesting responses from some great guests, many of which you're going to have listened to already, and you'll have enjoyed their content. If you haven't, go back and check out the previous episodes.
The biggest part of things that I would advise myself if I were sitting next to my 22-year-old self when I went into the world of work, and I'd probably advise myself the same thing today, quite frankly, is be kind to yourself, right? What I mean by that is in a commercial role, whether you're an SDR, salesperson, a manager, a CRO, it doesn't matter. There's only so much you directly control. And sometimes we work really blooming hard and things don't go our way. And it's really, really hard at points to let that go, right? I always think about my younger son, Theo's football matches. And when they miss a goal, they say, unlucky, right? They don't say, man, you were really crap. Maybe, I mean, he's not Premier League, granted, but I think it's that mindset that we all need to bring where we learn from our mistakes, of course, but we also realize in a commercial role, there's going to be swings and roundabouts, as the Brits say, which is a wonderful saying, and things aren't always going to go our way, and that's okay.
When I started it all, I was like, don't take it personal. That was probably something I had to learn over time. I mean, learned it fast, but nothing ever is personal. So to have this distance really helped me in the very beginning to excel. And there's a lot of lovely people out there, and everything is to lift you up. I mean, you would have in sales sometimes customers who are not pleased, or colleagues, or it's never personal. So I think with that attitude, you're probably on a good trajectory.
I think number one thing would be to ask for help early and ask for support or input from external people, particularly when it comes to building a company. But I think that applies to any person. So finding external mentors at the end of the day, I think is extremely important. It's something that took me probably until I was around 24, 25 to find a formal person that I can speak on a regular basis and started to get to know me. I wished I'd done that 5 years earlier because I could have avoided so many different type of mistakes. And you can find these people. I started finding people in entrepreneurial networks in the beginning, but I think there's a fantastic way is to getting people with a different set of eyes and ears to your problems, and something who get to know you over time. And I also would say that if you're in a high pressure environment, a psychologist that you see on a regular basis as a more of a preemptive way to handle stress and problems, those ones in combination are two things that I would recommend to any person to do, no matter what, if you're in B2B SaaS or sales or engineering or do any other type of profession in any other way where you're ambitious.
There's a great thing that I learned. I took a course a couple of years ago, and it was called Transformational Leadership. Really cool. It's led by a great professor, Mike. I'll think of his last name in a minute, but he's a Ivy League guy, and he's done incredibly innovative things. And he ran this great class, and one of the components within the class was this concept. It's a Japanese concept called ikigai. I think I'm saying that right. And so ikigai is the balance of the things that you're passionate about, the things that you're good at, and the things that you can get paid for.
That's a great question, and I've answered it before in the sense that I had a childhood and an upbringing that was really tough. And I did learn to be very resilient. I learned to be a survivor. And I think what I wished I had understood in my early career was that it was not weak to ask for help, that vulnerability can be your fortress. Culturally, I'm not sure that that would have worked in the climate that I was operating in. So I think, of course, it would be that. But when I also look back, and if you're asking me if there's anything else I wished I knew, I think I wished I hadn't. I wish I knew that life could sometimes be unfair. I wished I'd known that, because when it was unfair and hit me in the face like a big fat kipper, I think it took me down, and recovery was quite hard. Not that I ever showed it, but there's a lot of internalizing that goes on, and I never really had access to huge amounts of mentors that people have today, and that does make a difference. And I guess I wish I'd been a mentor earlier and understood how much of a difference it can make when someone you just listening, not necessarily offering solutions, but just listening, because it's very powerful. And anybody can be a mentor. You don't have to be at the top of your career. Anybody can do that for somebody else. And generosity is a really underrated gift to people. And I would say that if you do have the opportunity to just sit and listen to someone who's struggling a bit, then offer the hand of support, because it can make or break someone's day, someone's career, or someone's career choice.
What we talked about earlier, that to be successful, you've got to show up, and it's as much about the heart as it is the head. It's about your passion, your drive, your ability to connect with other people, help other people solve their problems as an individual contributor. And then as a leader, it's the same stuff, like be in the service of others, and think of yourself even as a senior leader, like you're in the service of the team. Like I work for them, they don't work for me. And I think it's seeing it as fundamentally solving people's problems and being in the service of others. And therefore it's okay to show up with your humanity, with your vulnerability, and let people see your true self. I think that's probably what it is. In my early days, I thought it was, as you described it, like it's about being tough and about being inscrutable and invulnerable, and almost like a machine, relentless, and it isn't those things. Actually, it's about the other things we've been talking about.
I have learned so much in the past 2 years interviewing 100 great sales leaders for the Sales Code Leadership podcast. And I know that many of our listeners have learned an enormous amount from listening to their responses to my questions as well. If you really have enjoyed it, please leave some comments on the YouTube channel if that's where you're watching the show, or maybe a brief review on whatever platform you're listening to it on. I'd like to end by thanking Medic Media, our production partners, who've taken this to new heights in terms of the quality of the delivery of what you listen to and see. I'd like to thank all of the great leaders that we've had as guests on the show in the past 2 years. And finally, to you, the listener, because without you, there really would be no Sales Code Leadership podcast. Thank you.